At 9:12 a.m., the room still carried that polished, artificial calm, glass walls, controlled lighting, quiet ambition humming beneath every surface. Then his voice cut through it, sharp, public, final. "Return today, or you're fired." A line meant to end a story. Instead, it exposed one. She didn't argue, didn't hesitate. She stood, closed her laptop with a soft click that somehow felt louder than his ultimatum, and walked out, taking more than just herself with her. Within minutes, something invisible began to fracture. Systems slowed, messages stalled, eyes shifted, because what no one said out loud was already becoming impossible to ignore. By 9:13 a.m., the meeting room had already rearranged itself around the silence she left behind. No one moved at first, not because they agreed with what had just happened, but because the architecture of the moment demanded stillness. Glass walls, polished table, the CEO still standing at the head like a man who had just drawn a line and expected the world to reorganize itself accordingly. It didn't. Her chair remained slightly turned away from the table, a subtle angle, unfinished, like a sentence cut mid-word. Someone cleared their throat. Too early. Too loud. "She'll be back," the CEO said, almost casually, adjusting his cuff as if he'd just corrected a minor inefficiency. "They always come back." A few nods followed. Not agreement, reflex. But down the corridor, something else was already in motion. At 9:14, the first notification failed to deliver. It was small, invisible to most. A routine internal sync ping, delayed by 3 seconds longer than usual. The kind of delay that doesn't trigger alarms, but leaves a trace, a hesitation in the system's breathing. In operations, Marta frowned at her screen. "Did you get that?" she asked without looking up. "Get what?" "The pipeline acknowledgement, it's lagging." "Probably just load," came the answer. "We've got 3 deployments stacked this morning." Marta nodded but didn't relax, because the system they were talking about didn't lag. Not like this, not without a reason, not without her. At 9:15, the team elevator reached the ground floor. She stepped out first. Calm, measured. No rush in her movement, no visible fracture in her expression. Just clarity, like someone who had already completed the calculation everyone else was still pretending didn't exist. Behind her, 4 people followed, then 6, then 9. No announcements, no Slack messages, no dramatic declarations. Just quiet alignment. The kind that doesn't need explanation because it's built over years, not minutes. "Are we really doing this?" one of them asked, half a step behind her. She didn't turn around. "We're already doing it." That was enough. Back upstairs at 9:16, the second failure wasn't subtle. The dashboard in the network integrity panel flickered once, then reloaded with a warning state no one had seen in months. Sync error, node cluster. 3. Unresponsive. What the? 2 engineers leaned in at the same time. "Restart the node." "It's not responding to restart." "Then force it." "Already tried." A pause. Why is cluster 3 even critical for this batch? No one answered immediately, because the answer wasn't in the documentation, it was in her head. At 9:17, the CEO was still in the room. He hadn't sat down yet, a subtle detail, but one that began to stretch the longer it lasted. His phone lit up once on the table, then again. He ignored it the first time, picked it up the second. A single message from the CTO, "Where is she?" He frowned slightly, not concern, annoyance, as if the question itself was misplaced. He typed back, "Handled." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then, "Define handled." He didn't reply. Instead, he looked up at the room, scanning faces that suddenly seemed less stable than they had 5 minutes ago. Too quiet, too careful. "Let's continue," he said. But no one picked up the thread, because somewhere between 9:12 and 9:17, the structure had already shifted. At 9:18, Marta stood up. "I'm going to check something." No one stopped her, because by now everyone felt it. Not panic, not yet. Something colder, like a system holding its breath. and the uncomfortable realization that the person who knew how to release it was already in the elevator, descending out of reach. Outside, the morning air felt different, cleaner, less filtered. She paused for a fraction of a second before stepping forward, not to reconsider, but to listen, as if confirming something internal had aligned exactly as expected. Behind her, one of the team members checked his phone. Guys. He turned the screen slightly. A red banner notification. System alert. Core process delay. Another one followed. Then another. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Because the story the CEO thought he had just ended was only now beginning to reveal its actual architecture. And somewhere above them, behind glass and confidence, the first real crack had already formed. By 9:19 a.m., the building was still standing exactly as before. Same glass, same light, same quiet prestige. But internally, the logic had begun to unravel. It didn't explode. It drifted. Small inconsistencies, micro delays, systems that didn't fail outright but stopped agreeing with each other. And in a company built on synchronization, disagreement is the first real fracture. At 9:20, the operations dashboard no longer refreshed in real time. Marta stared at it, arms crossed now, the earlier doubt crystallizing into something sharper. "This isn't load," she said quietly. Across from her, Daniel tried to reroute the process manually. Switching to fallback cluster. Pause. No response. "Try the mirror." "I am." Another pause. Longer this time. "It's not recognizing the mirror." That shouldn't have been possible. The mirror cluster was hard linked into the system architecture. Invisible, redundant, always there. Unless... Daniel stopped typing. Wait. He pulled up the dependency map, and for the first time that morning, someone said it out loud. Why is the mirror pointing to a manual override layer? Silence. Because no one remembered building that layer. No one except her. At 9:21, the CTO didn't wait for another message. He was already moving down the corridor, fast enough that people stepped aside without thinking. Not panic, precision. The kind that only appears when instinct overrides protocol. "Status," he said before even reaching the operations room. Marta turned. "Cluster 3 is unresponsive. Mirror isn't syncing. There's a manual override we don't fully—" "I know about the override," he cut in. That changed the room, because if he knew, then this wasn't an accident. "Where is she?" he asked again, sharper now. No one answered immediately. Not because they didn't know, but because answering meant acknowledging something they weren't ready to say out loud. At 9:22, the CEO finally sat down. Not by decision, by necessity. His phone had been vibrating almost continuously now. Notifications stacking, overlapping, pushing through whatever narrative he had constructed 5 minutes earlier. He opened one message. Revenue stream B, delayed execution, another. Client sync failure, priority accounts, and then one that lingered a second longer than the others. Internal note, dependency mismatch detected. He exhaled slowly. Not fear, calculation. Because numbers like that don't scream, they accumulate. At 9:23, outside the building, the team had stopped walking. No dramatic pause, just a natural halt, like a group that instinctively reached the same conclusion at the same time. One of them checked the system logs remotely. "It's spreading." Another leaned closer. "How far?" Cluster 3 triggered a cascade. It's touching ops, finance, even external AP is. A third voice, quieter. "Can they fix it?" No one answered immediately. She finally turned. Not quickly. Not arrogantly, not emotionally, just accurately. Because what they were watching wasn't a crash, it was a dependency collapse, and those don't respond to quick fixes. At 9:24, inside, the CTO was already at the main console. "Pull the architecture layers," he said. "They're loading, slowly. Skip visualization, raw structure. Lines of code, nodes, connections. A map that used to look like a clean network now resembled something more organic, interlinked, interdependent, dense in ways no one had fully documented, and right at the center, a control layer, manual, adaptive, unlabeled. The CTO leaned in. She built a dynamic override. Marta frowned. For what? He didn't answer immediately, because the answer wasn't technical, it was strategic. At 9:25, the CEO walked into operations, not rushed, not outwardly concerned, but there was a difference now, subtle, but visible to anyone paying attention. What's the situation? He asked. The CTO didn't turn. We've lost synchronization across multiple clusters. Fix it. A pause. We're trying. That's not an answer. Now the CTO did turn. No, he said evenly. That's the only answer you have right now. The room tightened, because authority, in that moment, stopped sounding absolute. At 9:26, another alert came in. Process halt, core operations degraded. Not a failure, a halt, intentional, designed. The CTO looked at the screen for a long second, then, almost under his breath, she didn't break the system. The CEO's jaw tightened. Then what did she do? A beat. The kind that stretches just enough to become uncomfortable. She designed it. To stop without her. Outside, no one checked their phone anymore. They didn't need updates. They could feel the shift without them. Because when a system that complex stops cooperating, it's not noise. It's signal. And somewhere between a public ultimatum and a quiet walkout, control had changed hands. Not visibly. Not officially. But decisively. And the part no one upstairs had fully processed yet was that this wasn't the peak of the problem. It was the introduction. If you think this was just a walkout, you're missing the architecture behind it, because what looks like silence on the surface is often a system making a decision underneath. Subscribe, and pay close attention to what happens next. Because in the next chapter, one question changes everything. Who actually controls the system when the person who designed its limits is no longer in the room? By 9:27 a.m., the company was no longer trying to fix the system. It was trying to understand it. A subtle shift, but a critical one, because fixing assumes control. Understanding admits you've lost it. The main screen in operations no longer showed clean dashboards. It showed layers, hidden ones, structural ones, the kind that aren't meant for daily use, only for those who built the system from the inside out. The CTO stood still, scanning the architecture without touching anything. "Don't push anything live," he said quietly. One of the engineers hesitated. "But if we don't?" "If you do," he cut in, "you might lock us out completely." That landed, because now the risk wasn't downtime, it was exclusion. At 9:28, the first external call came in. Priority client, Tier 1, the kind of account that doesn't wait in queues. Marta picked up. "Yes, we're aware. No, it's not a full outage. We're stabilizing." She paused, listening. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly around the receiver. "I understand the impact," she said. "We'll update you shortly." She hung up. "They're asking if this is systemic," she said. No one answered, because everyone already knew the answer. At 9:29, the CEO stepped closer to the main console. "Can we bypass it?" The CTO didn't look at him. "Bypass what?" "This layer. Override it." A brief silence. Then, finally, the CTO turned. "That layer is the override." The CEO's expression shifted, just slightly. "Then disable it." Another pause, longer this time. "On paper?" the CTO said. "Yes. And in reality?" "We don't fully know what it's connected to." At 9:30, the architecture map finished loading. What they saw wasn't a flaw. It was design. A distributed logic system that didn't rely on a single command path, multiple dependencies feeding into each other, cross-checks embedded deep enough that removing one piece wouldn't simplify the structure, it would destabilize it, and right in the center, that same adaptive layer. Not dominant, but decisive. Marta leaned closer. It's conditional, she said. How? It's not blocking everything. It's evaluating. Evaluating what? She didn't answer immediately, because the pattern was just starting to reveal itself. Outside, at 9:31, she finally checked her phone. Not for updates, for confirmation. 3 missed calls, 2 internal alerts, 1 message from an unknown number. She ignored all of them. Behind her, someone asked quietly, "Are they trying to override it?" She nodded once. "They will." "And?" A small pause. "Then they'll understand why that's a problem." Back inside, the CTO zoomed into the core logic. Lines of code scrolled past, dense, precise, intentional. Then he stopped. "There." He pointed at a conditional branch. Marta leaned in. "What is that?" He read it silently first, then again, slower. "It's a dependency check." "For what?" He exhaled. "Authorization integrity." The room went still, because that wasn't a system metric, that was a decision layer. At 9:32, the CEO's phone rang again. This time he answered. "Yes." Pause. "No, we're handling it." Longer pause. His expression didn't break, but something behind it recalibrated. "I'll call you back." He ended the call and looked at the CTO. "How long?" The CTO didn't answer immediately, because the honest answer wasn't a number, it was a condition. At 9:33, another alert appeared. Access restriction, elevated actions limited, not denied, limited, targeted, intentional. Marta stepped back slightly. "It's not shutting us out," she said. "It's controlling what we can do." "Based on what?" someone asked. The CTO didn't look away from the screen. "Based on who we are." Outside, the wind picked up slightly, brushing against the glass facade above them. She looked up for a moment, not at the building itself, but at the reflection it cast. Controlled, impressive, precise. From the outside, inside, something very different was unfolding. One of the team members spoke again, quieter now. "Did you plan this?" She shook her head. "No." A beat. "I prepared for it." That difference mattered. At 9:34, inside, the CTO finally leaned back, not in defeat, in recognition. He looked at the CEO. "You didn't just lose a person," he said calmly. "You triggered a condition." The CEO held his gaze. "And what condition is that?" Another pause. Measured. Exact. "The one where the system decides it doesn't trust the command anymore." Silence followed. Not the empty kind. The kind that fills a room when the rules everyone thought they understood quietly stop applying. And for the first time that morning, the question wasn't how to fix the system. It was whether the system would allow itself to be fixed at all. By 9:35 a.m., the illusion of control had fully separated from reality. The screens were still on, data was still flowing, nothing had crashed, and yet, nothing was moving forward, like an engine running perfectly. In neutral. "Try a controlled input," the CTO said. Daniel hesitated. "What kind?" "Something small, non-critical." A routine task was queued, internal, low priority, harmless. They executed it. The system accepted the request, processed it, returned a response, completed. A few shoulders dropped slightly. "See?" someone said too quickly. "It's not blocking everything." The CTO didn't react. "Now try a privileged action." The room tightened again. At 9:36, the second command went through, a minor configuration change, nothing destructive, just enough to test authority. Enter, processing, a pause, longer than before. Then the screen shifted. Access conditional, validation required. Daniel frowned. "What validation?" Marta leaned closer. "It's not asking for credentials." "Then what is it asking for?" Another second passed. Then the system responded again. Command context rejected silence, because that wasn't an error, it was a judgment. At 9:37, the CEO stepped forward. "Run it under my credentials." No one moved immediately, Not out of defiance, out of uncertainty. Because for the first time, credentials didn't feel like authority. They felt irrelevant. "Do it," he repeated. Daniel complied. Same command, elevated credentials, full access level, enter, processing. This time the delay was shorter, the response was not. Authority mismatch, action denied. No explanation, no alternative, just a clean refusal. The CEO's expression didn't break, but something behind it tightened. "That's impossible," he said quietly. The CTO shook his head once. "No," he replied. "It's new." Outside at 9:38, the team didn't need updates anymore. The pattern was obvious. One of them exhaled slowly. "They're locked out." She didn't correct him, but she didn't fully agree either. "Not locked out," she said. "Filtered." He looked at her. "That's worse." She didn't respond. At 9:39, inside, the CTO moved closer to the core layer again. "Scroll back," he said. Daniel pulled up the previous responses. Accepted, accepted, rejected, rejected, a pattern, not random. "Run a sequence," the CTO said, "low to high authority." They did. Basic user command, accepted. Mid-level process, accepted with delay. Senior level override, rejected. Executive command, rejected instantly. The room shifted, because the hierarchy had inverted. At 9:40, Marta whispered what everyone was starting to understand. "It trusts the system more than it trusts us." The CTO didn't correct her, because technically, she wasn't wrong. The CEO stepped back slightly, not retreating, recalculating. "Then we remove the condition," he said. The CTO looked at him. "How?" "Strip the layer, roll back." A pause. "We can't." "Why not?" Because the answer wasn't procedural, it was structural. "It's not a separate layer," the CTO said. "It's integrated." He gestured at the architecture map. "You don't remove it without touching everything else." "And if we do?" Another silence. He didn't soften it. "Then you don't get your system back," the CTO said. "You get something else." At 9:41, a new alert appeared. Not red, not urgent, just precise. System state, protective mode active. Marta read it twice. Protective? For what? Someone asked. No one answered immediately, because the wording wasn't technical, it was intentional. Outside, she finally spoke again, quietly. "As long as it thinks the system is at risk." They all looked at her. "It won't cooperate." "Risk from what?" A beat. She didn't rush it. "From decisions." At 9:42, inside, the CTO leaned forward again. "There's one way to test it," he said. Everyone looked at him. "What?" He didn't look at the screen this time. He looked at the CEO. "Reverse the command." A pause. "Meaning?" "Instead of forcing control?" Another beat. "Restore what it expects." The CEO's gaze narrowed slightly. "And what exactly does it expect?" The CTO held it. "Continuity." The word settled into the room with more weight than any alert so far. Because continuity isn't code, it's trust. The CEO didn't answer immediately. For the first time that morning, there was no instant directive, no reflex decision, just a moment, measured, unfamiliar. And in that moment, the system didn't change, didn't escalate, didn't collapse. It simply waited, as if the next move wasn't technical anymore, but human. And somewhere between authority and consequence, the balance had already shifted, not loudly, not visibly, but completely. By 9:43 a.m., the system had stopped escalating. No new alerts, no additional failures, no visible deterioration, just a stable, controlled pause. And somehow, that was more unsettling than collapse. "It's waiting," Marta said quietly. No one argued, because every indicator on the screen confirmed it. No degradation, no recovery. A perfectly balanced state, held in place by something that wasn't pressure, but condition. The CTO folded his arms. "Not for time," he added. for alignment. At 9:44, the CEO looked at the architecture again. Same system, same company, same authority structure, but none of it was behaving the way it had 10 minutes ago. "What does it want?" he asked. The CTO didn't answer immediately, because framing it that way was already a mistake. "It doesn't want anything," he said. "It evaluates." A pause. "And right now, it's not approving us." Outside, she finally sat down on the low concrete edge near the entrance. Not tired, just done moving. One of the team members checked the logs again. "They've stopped pushing commands." She nodded slightly. "They're thinking." "That good?" Another small pause. "It's necessary." At 9:45, inside, the CTO made a decision. "Open the event trace," he said. Daniel hesitated. "That's going to expose the full sequence." "I know." A few seconds later, the screen filled with a chronological log, not just of system actions, but of triggers, responses, validations, cause, effect, and then a line that didn't belong to any standard process. Trigger event, authority conflict detected below it, context, shift, primary architect absent. The room went completely still, because now it wasn't theory, it was recorded fact. The CEO stepped closer. "Primary architect?" he repeated. No one needed to explain who that referred to. The CTO spoke instead. "It's recognizing a structural absence," he said, "and adjusting behavior accordingly." "Adjusting how?" Another pause. "By reducing risk." At 9:46, Marta leaned in again. "Scroll further." The log continued. Decision branches, conditional checks, authorization comparisons, then protective mode engaged, dependency uncertain, and beneath that, a subline, recommended state, stability until context resolved, no alarms, no urgency, just a recommendation from the system itself. Outside, the wind had settled. The glass facade above them reflected a quieter version of the same building, unchanged, composed, almost indifferent. One of the team members spoke again. "So what happens now?" She didn't answer immediately, because the answer depended on something she couldn't control. "They decide," she said finally. "Based on what?" "A beat. Whether they understand what just happened." At 9:47, inside, the CEO looked at the log again. Not scanning now. Reading. Line by line. Slower than before. As if trying to reconstruct a moment he had already moved past. "Authority conflict," he repeated under his breath. The CTO didn't interrupt, because this wasn't a technical moment anymore, it was interpretive. "Call her," the CEO said. No one moved, not out of hesitation this time, out of awareness, because a call, right now, wasn't just communication, it was acknowledgement, and once made, it couldn't be reframed. At 9:48, the phone was on the table, silent, unmoved. The CEO looked at it, then at the screen, then back again. For the first time that morning, the timeline had slowed down enough to feel deliberate. No pressure, no countdown, just a decision point. Clear, unavoidable. Outside, her phone vibrated once. She didn't pick it up immediately, not out of defiance, out of precision, because timing in moments like this isn't emotional, it's structural. She let it ring, once, twice, then stopped. No voicemail, no follow-up, just silence again. At 9:49, inside, nothing changed. The system remained stable, protected, waiting, and in that stillness, the realization finally settled, not as panic, not as urgency, but as clarity. This wasn't about fixing a failure, it was about resolving a condition, one that had been triggered publicly, irreversibly, and now required something far less technical than any of them expected. The CTO looked at the CEO one last time. "Until the context is restored," he said calmly, "this is the system." The CEO didn't respond, because for the first time that morning, there was nothing left to command, only something to understand. Outside, she finally picked up the phone, looked at the screen, then locked it again. Not yet, because the system wasn't the only thing waiting, and whatever happened next wouldn't be triggered by code, but by choice, the kind you only get once, and never in the same way again. End.